Welcome to the Muscle Expert Podcast with Ben Pakulski, one of the world's top professional bodybuilders, an expert on human performance and mindset mastery. Ben dives deep to deliver the strategies of the top experts to upgrade your body, mind, muscle, strength, performance, biochemistry, and how to become the upgraded modern man.
Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the Muscle Expert Podcast. I am your host, Ben Pakulski, and today we're diving into biohacking. Biohacking, if you don't know what that means, is a simple practice of doing something to influence the way your body works, trying to upgrade your biology, trying to upgrade your internal chemistry, whether it be from your brain, your sleep, your gut, learning how to influence your environment so that it can influence your body in a more appropriate, more effective way. And today I'm going to speak with Quantified Bob, and you can check him out at quantifiedbob.com. And this guy's, the lead biohacker, one of the lead biohackers, hacking his environment and hacking his body so that he can live his greatest life. And I think this is a really cool conversation to have. And Bob and I have a lot of really interesting parallels. It seems as though we've narrowed down this biohacking game to a very few number of things that are actually making a difference. A lot of these things I just kind of do naturally. I don't call it biohacking. I've been someone who hasn't attached to this term biohacking because I think it's just a fad. But the reality is we all just want to live an awesome life. And the reality is we all want to find ways to positively influence our physiology. So things we've been doing to biohack is, hey, as a bodybuilder, I've been biohacking for 20 years. I'm trying to find ways to improve my workouts, find ways to improve my recovery, find ways to improve my sleep. That's it. And then somebody just put a name on this biohacking thing. But the reality is we're all doing this. We're all doing it anyways. And Bob is just a guy who's quantifying what he's doing. And the things he quantifies is air and light and sound and how to improve his sleep and how to improve his brain. We've got some really interesting insights in this conversation. I enjoyed this conversation. So it's a really light, not overly heavy as far as education, but it's a really great insight into how you can start to influence the things that are holding you back. So when it comes to influencing your life, you guys should all be looking at influencing one thing at a time. So if you're a poor sleeper, you got to fix it. If your training stinks, you got to fix it. If it's, maybe you have too much stress, you got to fix it. And just think about fixing one thing at a time. So Quantified Bob and I dive into how to hack your biology from a bottleneck perspective. So I hope you enjoy this conversation. As always, when you love the conversation, share it with one person that you know will love the show and help us continue to grow this incredible mission of living an amazing life in a body that you love. Have an amazing day. Enjoy the show with Quantified Bob. You got some awesome stuff on your site. I'm actually kind of geeking out on your site for the last few days. It's very interesting.
Thanks. Yeah, there's it's a sort of a body of work that's evolved over the last few years. Since I started it. Actually, originally it wasn't even meant to be. It was just for me to get my ideas down, my data down, and then I realized people actually were interested in it.
What's your background?
My background's actually in technology. I've been an entrepreneur for a long time, built a few companies, early days of the web, digital marketing, but always tech, kind of emerging technology. And in this sort of area has always just been more of a personal passion since I was like a teenager, trying to really see what makes me tick. And so with over, let's say, the last 5 or 6 years, we have access to so much more information about ourselves that than we could have ever imagined. So for me, it's just been amazing to be able to dig into that even deeper.
I first heard about you from a good friend of mine, Matt Gallant. You know Matt? I don't know if you know him personally.
Not personally, no. Sorry.
No, he's a biohacker, man, and I figure you guys. So he's the reason I ask. He's also an entrepreneur, like kind of a serial entrepreneur, very very successful guy. Lives in Panama.
Oh wow. Yeah, no, it's you tend to find these trends where people that are sort of in this biohacking space tend to be these. I guess you'd call them more A-type people. They're very driven, so they tend to be, more on the entrepreneurial side, or maybe they were more on the elite athletic side, and because they're willing to go deep on something and commit to it, and then they go all in on these things. So, it's definitely
so
like,
true.
Yeah, I see a lot of folks that are definitely on the entrepreneurial side of especially tech.
How long have you been doing the biohacking stuff?
I mean, the blog and all that, it's been going on for about 7-8 years, but the biohacking, the idea of it, I mean, the term really just started getting thrown around a few years ago. And then there was quantified self, and But if you think back, we could think back to when we were like, for me at least, in high school and into college, where you didn't have access to all these tools and stuff. You used a scale and a tape measure and, and that kind of stuff, and a stopwatch. And we, it's just that we weren't calling it necessarily biohacking, but especially for me, I grew up kind of the atypical hard gainer. I was pretty skinny, even though I was pretty successful at athletics, and I was trying to figure out ways to increase strength and improve my speed and things like that. So that was my kind of really foray into it, and then just that curiosity about trying to learn about what makes myself tick.
Man, you've hacked a lot of super cool stuff that I definitely want to dive into. The biggest thing that that caught my attention on your site was starting to understand your environment, because we have so many environmental inputs that are influencing our biology, and that was really, really fascinating. Actually, I think that's how I found you. Was I'm moving into a new house, and I'm like, okay, what do I got to do to fix my water supply, fix my air quality, even being aware of VOCs that exist that most people don't pay attention to. Can you tell me a little bit about that? Like, I know you've hacked your house and you've hacked your environment pretty extensively, because I think
Sure.
that's one that most people miss. And one of the big things that I talk about before even people want to start biohacking your body is you got to remove the stimulus, right? You got to remove the junk.
Well, that's exactly it. We think of biohacking because of the word bio. We assume it's things that or supplements we're taking or food we're eating and that sort of stuff. And we pay very little attention to the actual environment around us, and that actually can create more chaos in our bodies than anything else. And especially living in modern society and urban environments. I live in New York City, so I'm just getting it's about keeping my head above water as much as being optimal. So you start looking into areas that you can get these easy wins and try to not just understand things that might be adversely affecting your well-being, but how do you make changes or adjustments to overcome them. So in my home, for example, I have looked into things like air quality. How do you understand what's affecting that, and the sort of chain of events that can trigger, as well as things like water quality, which in our homes, especially like if you live in a house, you might have more control over how you can treat that water or do things to make it more drinkable, versus like living in an apartment, maybe where someone might be renting it and they can't necessarily rip out the walls and install whole home filtration systems. Mm-hmm. And so then there's things like oxidative stress we're getting from our environments, and so you start exploring all these areas that even like EMF, like electromagnetic radiation that we're getting from everything from power lines and in the walls of our buildings to cell phone towers and Wi-Fi, and and not to put on the tinfoil hat, but it's more about understanding it.
I'm all about the tinfoil hat, man. You got to protect that thing.
Well, but it's also about like what are those easy, what are things that you can easily do that, like, so for like EMFs, I measured everything around my home, and especially my bedroom, because everything ultimately boils down to like, if your sleep is kind of like sacred, and if you're not optimizing that, everything else is going to fall apart. So for me, like with EMF, I found that there were some wiring issues in my bedroom, especially like near my headboard of my bed. There's actually like some high levels of EMFs coming from uninsulated cable, let's say, from like a coaxial cable for like a television.
Can you tell me about the meter what the meter was to check that? Because I've used a few of them, and one of them I felt like I needed about 6 PhDs to figure out how to use, and the other one didn't seem to give me very accurate readings. So I'm curious.
Yeah, the main one I use is called Trifield, the Trifield meter. And what that means is it can measure 3 different levels of the spectrum. So you go from low EMF to all the way up to like microwave frequencies. But it's also, I think of it as a trimeter, because if you think of the world as being in 3 dimensions, well, EMFs are 3-dimensional. So so most meters, if you don't point them in the plane of where the radiation, where it's coming from, you'll see that the levels change. But the Trifield meter is cool because it's kind of like, you can orient it any way, and it's still getting a 3-dimensional representation of at that point that it's at what's happening. And it's just a simple meter that there's a red area. If you go into the red, that's bad. And so they keep it very. And what's interesting is those are the red based on in the United States, we've got these levels that we want to keep under, but in Europe and other parts of the world, it's actually much lower. So, if you just look at your ambient environment, you'll see like often there could just be an ambient like level that's extremely high, and it may change throughout the day as Wi-Fi routers are going on and off, or if you're anywhere in line with near a window or near like cell phone towers, like things that relay signals. You may have wiring issues in your home that are causing it. So you may have like a poorly grounded electrical outlet that somehow is putting current onto like if you have a sprinkler system in like an apartment building, you may be like just bathing yourself in this stuff. Yeah. And and then there's other like simple tools. Like I'm talking to you right now on a pair of headphones that I don't actually have speakers in my ears. It's actually the speakers are about a foot down and pushes air through little tubes that go into my ears. So I try to keep things. Yeah, and so I try to keep things away from my body, as much as possible.
Tell me, what brand is that? Tell me about that. That's because like I'm pretty neurotic about never putting a phone against my head, but I didn't even think about speakers being an issue in there. Yeah,
exactly. So so that you can do things, keep your phone away from your body and from your head. The ones I'm using now are called this company called Aircom. If you just look for air tube headphones, there's a bunch of different companies making them now. The challenge is that and they're relatively inexpensive, but then you find some that are actually built cheaply. And so I tend to go through one every couple months, like I'll break a wire on them, or they'll be in a bag and they'll just get messed up. So I kind of anticipate I go through about 2 to 3 of them a year. Not great for listening to music on, but good for like podcasts, things like that.
Oh, cool, man. Yeah. So I'm pulling up on Amazon right now. They're like $31. That's pretty super cheap.
Yeah. There's some brands that are, companies that are just taking them, like they make them in China, let's say, and they just put their logo on them and then they double the price. But
sure.
I've tried different ones, and they'll put different quality of the speakers inside. So like I said, some of them, like you just can't listen to music on them. It sounds terrible, but good for just like phone calls and listening to like spoken word podcasts, things like that.
Perfect, great tip, man. I'm like I said, I don't put Bluetooth against my head, I don't put my phone against my head, but like I always kind of disregarded headphones. Like they're just like, I'm plugging it into my phone. It's got a good distance from my head, but I thinking about the speaker in there, didn't realize that would be causing an issue.
And it's actually, in the grand scheme of things, it's not a major source. Like I've done measurements where I've had like the over the ear like Bose headphones, and we were measuring kind of like putting the meter between the headphones, each of the sides of it, and looking at the levels. And even those headphones, because even if they're over the ear, the speaker's not in your ear. It's about, let's call it a half an inch to an inch away. Right. And EMF is all based on this rule called inverse square law. So as you just move away from the source, the levels drop off like logarithmically almost. It's very so things like in my bedroom where I had high EMFs by my headboard where I'm sleeping, I just moved my bed about a foot away from the wall, and the levels dropped like considerably. So there's some simple ways to like if there's if you know exactly where there's a source of EMFs coming from, you can do that. And so with headphones as well, for me it was more about if I'm going to be putting something in my ear where I know the source is there versus over the ear. I think it's like I still have those types of headphones. I'll use them if I'm listening to like music and things like that. But I'm not going to wear them 10 hours a day.
So what are you doing to mitigate the EMF? Obviously, one, moving it away from the source. I'm sure there's some other strategies using to get rid of the EMF, because that's a big one, right? That's one that if I can, or I've got kids, and I'm very concerned with that for my kids, and I'm very concerned with that for myself, obviously trying to live a long time. Unfortunately, I live in a city, not by my choice, but I do. So like yourself, live in New York City. What are you doing to get rid of, the 30 different Wi-Fi signals you have radiating through your head at any one moment in time?
Well, right. So the challenge is, what are things that you have control of that you can actually do to mitigate some of these effects versus, just it's what's in your environment. So if I'm walking around in New York City, if I just walk around the streets, with my meter, you'll just see crazy like spikes in levels. So in terms of walking around town, that's the environment. So there are people coming out with like EMF shielding clothing and things like that. But you're still being bathed in it. And especially as we roll out these like 5G networks, it's going to be even worse. Now in my home, I just know I can have some control of my home. So like, and within my home, my bedroom is where I spend, let's call it a third of my day. So if I'm going to take the easy wins, I'm going to go for where I get the maximum benefit, right? So my bedroom is where I focus most of my efforts. I want to make sure that that is like my sacred space. And as a third of my day, it's when I'm sleeping, it's when my body's regenerating. So I will go there and, for different types of EMFs. So I mentioned like low EMF, which comes from things like house wiring and all of that. It's very difficult to shield that because you literally will need like lead to block it fully. Whereas RF, which comes from things like Wi-Fi and cell towers, you can do everything from shielding, putting a transparent coating on windows that help block some of that. And there's even curtains and other tools that will help with it. I just proactively throughout my home, when possible, I turn off my Wi-Fi router. I'll use a wired Ethernet internet connection on my laptop. Always keep it plugged in even. So I have like a MacBook Pro, and if you unplug it from an outlet, it's actually being grounded somewhat and shielded by being plugged into an outlet. And if you actually take that away and you're just running on batteries, you'll actually see the levels shoot up.
Interesting.
And so so when possible, I keep it plugged in as well. I don't put the laptop on my lap. There's a tremendous amount of stuff that wherever you've got the antennas on the device, you're going to see a huge effect. So from a shielding perspective, my laptop's always on top of a pad that shields from EMF. So even if it's not on my lap, even if it's on a desk above me, like where I'm sitting at a table or a desk, I'm always having it on top of one of those pads.
Just like a EMF blocking pad?
Yes, exactly. It's like
shielded. Do you sell those on your website, or do you have a site you recommend to get this from?
I don't sell them. There's companies like one's called Defender Shield that makes them, and they're pretty inexpensive. And you just my laptop just sits on top of it, and I know it's going to at least protect my goods.
Yeah,
from, anything radiating down. And like I said, laptops never on my lap. There's a reason why Apple doesn't even call these computers laptops anymore. They don't want to make claims that you should ever have them on your laptop.
I didn't even recognize that.
Yeah, and then if you go through your home with like a meter, you'll notice you can find these like areas that kind of have excessive levels of EMFs going on. So common sources are things like in the kitchen, definitely like your microwave is probably the biggest culprit. Even if it's off, it's still giving off a ton of EMF. So like 10 feet away, you're still going to see the meter kind of light up, which is really interesting.
How about if it's unplugged?
If it's unplugged, it's better. So like I leave mine unplugged. I have one in my home, but it's basically just unplugged. Because it's just that by being plugged in, and anything that has like a motor, so things like a blender and dishwasher, like those are going to create pretty big fields. So those obviously aren't running all the time. Like a blender might not be, but the dishwasher, even if it's always plugged in, so there may still be some being given off. Even your oven, your stove, if you have a modern kind of electric, like stovetop, even if it's gas powered, if the controls are electronic, there's going to be a charge there. So like, imagine, for me, like the analogy I make is I'm making dinner and the microwave's, let's say, up mounted above the oven and I'm cooking something. Let's say you had the microwave going and you're cooking and you got the timer on your stove going. You're going to get radiated down, down around your groin area, and you're going to be getting your head bathed as well. So there's those types of things. Surprisingly, like if you have like a more modern television, like an LED sort of TV, those levels are much less. That's more of an electric field, but the levels will be less than, let's say, the old tube type TVs. And I learned this the hard way because I was measuring around my home, and I found an area in my living room right on a wall behind my couch that was really, really high, but it was shaped like a rectangle. And I couldn't figure out what was causing this like big spike in levels. And I live in New York City, so I'm in an apartment building. Well, it turned out that my next door neighbor has their TV right up against that wall, and they had like an old tube type TV, and it was just blasting right through the wall.
Wow.
So I had to reorganize my furniture a little bit so I'm not sitting all, in the evening
It's time to
with my
buy your
head
neighbor
right.
a gift, right? Buy them a new
Yeah,
TV.
totally. But then the idea is you want to be reasonable with these things. You want to find those, like, I'm all about it. We talk about biohacking and hacking. It's about maximum result for the minimal effort. And aside from saying, if someone said, how do I lower my levels? And I can say to them, well, move somewhere where it's, really low. But the reality of life is we can't all do that. So then you start saying, well, how can I mitigate based on my current situation? And it's never going to be ideal or optimal. And like I said, for me, it's often about, as much as it is about optimizing myself and my environment, it's also just trying to keep my head above water in terms of, like, all the crap that the environment's throwing at us.
Living in New York City, how do you start to influence your water supply? So obviously you have some degree of control over what's going into your body, what's coming out of your tap. How do you start to filter that? What do you use?
So yeah, with New York City actually has what's considered some of the, if you want to talk about tap water, which I don't drink regular tap water, but if you had to just take something out of the faucet, in terms of, I've tested that for all sorts of chemicals and other things, and actually my tap water came up pretty clean. But that being said, there's no substitute for, if you're going to drink water or try to get natural sources. So if you have access to drinking spring water, and because at one point I was taking tap water and I was trying to make it more alkaline, I was putting all these different, like, things inside of it, and I kind of looked at it one day and said, what am I doing? Why don't I just drink like real water, like natural water? And so we have services that will deliver 5 gallons, containers of pretty high quality spring water. If I need to treat it or take anything out of the tap, I use a filter called Zero Water.
Yeah.
That it basically takes all the total dissolved solids out of it. So it comes with a little meter that you can measure the before and after. And so not all dissolved solids are bad. I mean, there's things like natural minerals, they will show up. Like if you took a bottle of Pellegrino water, it's going to show high TDS because there's stuff in it. But if you don't know what's in the water, you want to knock everything out of it. So I might use that water for, like, making coffee in the morning or something. But for general consumption and drinking, I'm going to try to drink a better source. Another thing people miss, though, is they might filter, let's say, the tap water. They might be drinking, they think they're doing everything right, but they miss one important area, which is their shower, because it's the same water supply. And you might be, drinking spring water and doing all these great things, but if your shower is still using that same water and you're breathing in that steam, it's, if there's anything contaminating that water supply, you're still going to be exposed to it. So I use a filtration system, a filter on my shower head that kind of strips everything out. It'll take all the fluoride and chlorine and all that stuff out of it. A lot of people actually find that they feel like their hair and their skin feel actually more moisturized because it's removing a lot of things out of the water.
Right.
There are, if you have the ability to do so, you can install things like more of a whole home system, like a reverse osmosis system, that will process the incoming water, treat it, strip everything out, and then reintroduce certain minerals back into it so that you can drink it. Most people
Do you have a
who live
preferred brand?
There's one called Aqua Pure. I haven't used it just because in New York City, it's like you can't really install these systems in an apartment.
Right.
There's little small. I can send you a link to it after we talk.
Cool.
But there's a few, and there's some that they'll go under the counter, like so in the kitchen you can put one under the sink, but it's not a whole home system, so you're just going to be filtering your tap water, which some people are they're fine with that.
Super cool, man. And now one of the biggest infatuations for me, having living in Florida now, or spending most of my time in Florida, air quality. And the reason I say Florida is because Florida is historically extremely moldy from obviously excessive amounts of humidity. So I'm very curious what you're doing. And I actually read a lot of your research and all your data on your website around what you're doing to kind of hack your air.
Sure. Yeah, as you mentioned, poor air quality can cause a whole bunch of of issues for us. Mold is one issue, which is often a byproduct of high humidity in the home. So certain parts of the country will definitely suffer from it. But even in other places, you may have had water damage or things that are kind of hidden within your home that can cause issues. I did some testing around my home around it. I actually decided before I was going to rip up my walls and things like that. I was just going to do a test on myself to see if I have any symptoms of ongoing mold exposure. So there's a simple test called a VCS test. It's a visual contrast sensitivity test, and there's a couple websites out there. I think one used to be free. They might charge like a few dollars now for it, but it's a simple eye test you take. You can do it on your computer. You sit a couple feet away from the screen, and the idea is they show you these grayscale images that are increasingly, the contrast gets harder and harder to pick out in them. And based on how well you score, it equates to, they've correlated it with mold exposure. So people who have had bad mold exposure will do really poorly on these VCS tests. And so I'll periodically, I did it a few times just to do back-to-back tests to make sure the results were accurate. It said I was fine. And then I probably retest maybe once a year. And that's a way to see for myself, like if I'm suffering any symptoms, neurologically from that.
Very cool.
So in terms of testing mold in the home, I mean, we like to do a lot of these things on our own and kind of like, whether we're measuring EMFs and air quality and all of that. I mean, there is no substitute for having, if you have access and the funds available to bring in an expert, like a remediation expert who can really kind of go through your home and analyze things with some really, really high quality sensors. Because even things like mold, you may have to capture an air quality sample in the home and mail it out to a lab. And then they basically will, I guess they culture it or something to see if anything develops in there.
Yep.
But with air quality, mold's one area. We deal with things though. Like everyone's kind of doing air quality monitoring in their homes today. If they have like a carbon monoxide sensor in their homes, and smoke detectors and all that, we're basically looking for particles and things that are in the air. Now, what they've come out with over the last few years are these consumer grade air quality monitors that will have other sensors embedded in it. So you can look at things like carbon monoxide or even carbon dioxide, which is if we're exhaling that overnight while we're sleeping, things that are coming from things outdoor exposure like car exhaust. If you have poorly ventilated appliances, like if you have a gas dryer, things can be picked up. And so these air quality monitors are just a simple kind of passive way. You kind of set it and forget it, and it's going to collect data and kind of show you. You might see trends like at certain times of the day. Like for me, again, living in New York City, there's a grocery store down the street, and there's delivery trucks that come at certain times of the day. And so even if I'm not home, I can look at the data from the previous day, and I can see exactly when those trucks are idling out on the street. Because it's kind of the challenge here of like, we want to have, we go back to mold. The reason a lot of homes are dealing with mold right now is we've made the construction so good on homes where there's no leakage through windows or anything like that. And so that ability for air to kind of ventilate in and out is kind of something we need with mold. But at the same time, with air quality outside, if we have poor, if we have good, like our windows can let air in and out, you're going to get stuff leaking in from the outside. Right. So what I end up doing is I use a combination of air quality monitoring, and then I've got a portable air filters that will kind of like HEPA quality that will filter out the air and keep things in the home at levels that are considered healthy.
I love that, man. So that was one of the things that I found interesting and intriguing about what you wrote, was just the idea that we don't realize how much your carbon dioxide is going up when you're sleeping just by excreting, right? You're breathing in the air in the room, and then it's the catch-22 where do you want to open the window because then you're going to get more outdoor toxins that come in, or do you want to leave the window closed and accumulate carbon dioxide in the room? It's kind of one of these situations that, depending on where you live, you have to kind of learn to at least pay attention.
Yeah. And then to go into the sort of data aspects of this, then you start looking at, okay, I have the air quality information, and someone might go, well, I'm sleeping poorly. And then you're like, okay, well, let's figure out what's going on. You might see, for example, that, yeah, you woke up during the night when the air quality went down below a certain threshold because, let's say, the carbon dioxide built up, or some other metric, or it could be temperature, anything like that. And so you start figuring out, like, how do I move those, adjust those knobs to optimize my sleep? But maybe if I open the window, maybe it's noisy outside and the noise wakes me up. So you're really trying to juggle these, multiple variables and see what works for you.
What air filters are you using?
I use a combination of, so when I need to just really kind of get the air nice and clean and fresh, I have this little portable ozone generator that you don't want to be in the room when it's running. It's meant more as like, you close the door, you let it run for an hour, and everything kind of smells like it just after a thunderstorm. It just kind of cleans out stuff in the air. I bought this device that was it's just sort of this Chinese-made device. It's not really meant for making anything you want to drink with water or anything like that. And then I've got the air filters. I've got the one I'm currently using is look this one up real quick. There's a product that just came out. There's one that's called Molecule. It's like MOL.
Has it been released? I looked into that, but I don't think it's been released yet.
Yeah, it has been out. I think they might be producing it in batches, but it's expensive. But what it's doing is it's claiming to both filter air. It's actually be able to kill any pathogens that it pull in the air that it pulls through.
Yeah.
So it's a pretty extreme way to do it. So but they also made it sort of portable, so you can move it from room to room. And so with air quality, though, then there's these portable, like, more HEPA filters, where it will, just has like a double sort of filtration system. And I'm going to find you right now.
Do you have one of these molecule purifiers?
No, I don't. I missed the pre-orders on them, and to be honest, like, what I'm using now, my setup, I'm using an inexpensive, like a $250 filter that seems to do the trick. Like when I'm measuring, I think if you had people who had more like, I would say, with allergies, really bad allergies, or mold, they know of like mold exposure, I think those types of systems will be ideal for them.
Yeah, this is actually not that bad. It's $7.99. I don't know why. For some reason, I thought it was $9.99. I'm looking at the site right now. The one I have is, apparently the most like heavy duty thing, but the thing weighs about 80 pounds. So it's definitely not something you can carry around your house. This thing's very interesting.
Is it like the IQ Air one, or?
I had tried that one, man. Actually, this one came recommended because this is the one they tend to use in emergency rooms in Germany. And I was like, well, Germans tend to be pretty neurotic people, and emergency rooms tend to be a pretty sterile place. So it's called the Aranci Eric, and it's not that. It's like $1,200, and it was the one that was deemed to have like the most extensive HEPA filters, and et cetera, all these crazy bells and whistles to purify the air.
Yeah, no, that's great. I mean, I think people use a combination of, they want something that, you want to balance efficiency and effectiveness with some level of portability, especially if you're just saying, I'm going to move this from room to room versus just kind of have it always running, or you're trying to do something that's more like whole home.
I just make it part of my workout regimen, man. I lift it around the house once a day and I'm done for the day. I'm hacking my workout / air purifying. It's a deadlifting air purifying workout.
Just put handles on it. Yeah, you're good.
Oh, it's got handles, man. We're good.
Awesome.
I'm gonna put a neck strap on it. So one of the things that you mentioned on your site that I found really interesting was you were diving into your telomeres and the concept of biological aging, and I want to know how deeply you've dived into that, because that's super interesting to me. So, speaking to you transparently, I was a professional bodybuilder for 15 years. And I did my telomere test when I retired, and I had a biological age of 51, and I was 36. And I was like, oh shit, that sucks. Let's fix this. Since then, I've actually done the test one more time, and I've been able to reverse it a little bit with a few fasting strategies, with a few intelligent nutrition strategies. Messed with metformin for a little bit. Didn't really like it, but apparently that's supposed to reverse aging. Any insights and hacks you've discovered around that process?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing I would say is the concept of quantifying your biological age is far from an exact science right now.
Sure, yeah, absolutely.
So there's many, a lot of companies out there they're approaching it from different ways. So some are just looking at biomarkers, let's say from your blood testing, and they figured out if I take these 4 variables or 5 variables, that will give you a number that represents, hey, this is your biological age. You talked about telomeres, which are, we get more into genetics and looking at your DNA, and which is essentially like your telomeres are if you think of a shoelace, it's like the little plastic tips on the ends, and over time, as our cells divide, the DNA strands the tips will start fraying, and eventually they unravel, and that's where, like a cell, things die. And so the short, and there's a length to those telomeres, and so that the longer those telomeres are, it's a sign of lower biological age. So the big correlation there is, if you have DNA damage. So if you I would say things like really bad oxidative damage and stress and things like that can really affect it. And then you talk about things that you can do to reverse it, whether it's fixing your environment or improving some underlying conditions you may have in your body. But then there's other ones that are doing. They're looking at maybe just things like your heart rate and heart rate variability, and so they're all trying to come up with these formulas. And I mean, when I say it's an exact science, it's for a couple of reasons. One is a lot of these services, like I've done telomere testing, and then I learned that when I got my results, I asked them how big the sample size was, and it was very small. Yeah. So and also the sample size might be a particular subset of a population. So maybe typically healthy people who are live in a certain part of the world. So they don't really have it nailed down yet to where you're really going to get a representation of let's say someone's 40 years old and it says whether they're 30 or 50. Because I've totally screwed around with these tests. I did one where it was looking at heart rate variability and blood pressure, I think, and something else, and it had me as 10 years older than my real age, and I was like, that's really weird, and I was like, okay, let me change it. So I go, we're gonna retest in 5 minutes, and then I just sat and I did some breathing exercises, got myself in a more parasympathetic state, did it again, and hey, I just knocked 10 years off my biological age. Yeah. Yeah. So it's that's the other thing with any sort of testing is with these, when you're looking at whether it's blood pressure, heart rate variability, and all of that, it's about being consistent in how you're taking those measurements. And if you're changing the environment around, or you're doing it at different times of the day or under different conditions, it'll just throw it off. So I do think it'll get there as we as they build out bigger data sets and they can start applying more rigorous sort of analysis on the data to say okay, you equate to someone who's a typical person, but then you might say, I don't want to be a typical person. I want to see how I compare biologically to an elite athlete or someone that's more generally healthy.
I'm really interested in the central nervous system, and you wrote that you did a little bit of work on trying to maybe manipulate the CNS and the autonomic nervous system. Tell me about that.
Sure. So, I've done this in a few ways. One was more on the training side of it, incorporating some technologies and modalities that help with neuromuscular training. So, there's a couple of companies out there. One is based down in Austin called NeuFit.
Yeah, I'm very familiar. I've got one right beside me.
You have a newbie, great.
I do.
So okay. Have you already spoken about this?
Yeah. No, please do.
Yeah. So so the principles of something like the newbie device is it's about neuromuscular training and re-education. So we could take all the weights and get out of the weight room and let's just forget all of that for a second. the idea is that we're able to use send signals to the body that they get interpreted like as if you were actually doing a certain movement or moving a weight. And what they can do is by adjusting the sort of signal and the placement of these electrodes, it's not like an electrical, like a e-stim machine that you normally see, which just contracts your muscles. This is actually, they can do two things. One is identify all these neurological disconnects in your body. So often you'll see this if someone goes, I have knee pain, or I've got this condition that's been going on, and you realize the source isn't there. Is that you've got a protective measure happening in another part of your body, and so they have to override that signal and tell your brain it's okay, and get you back in, to where now, hey, my knee pain went away because now this muscle's firing that maybe wasn't firing. And you can do training with it as well, where a lot of the work that I've been doing around it was with in this space was more isometric type exercises. So holding long isometric kind of poses for while you're running this sort of electrical signal through your body, and you think you're going to die, or your brain's going crazy, but you're not. You're not going to get hurt. You're just using body weight essentially, and you eventually overcome that signal, and your body realizes it can properly contract and do things the way we were designed to. And especially like as we get older, we've developed all these inefficiencies in our bodies, and so oftentimes, like the analogy they use is, look at a baby or an infant and the way they move. They haven't, they've got the default pattern, they're programmed the way you're supposed to be programmed, and they haven't developed these like, walking a weird way or sitting crookedly and how we stand and get up or pick up an implement. And so so that type of technology has been really cool. And there's tools for like in terms of assessing, with CNS. I mean, one is you can do this every morning. There's like a tap test. You can basically put your hand on a table and with your fingers tips touching, and then just you can get a stopwatch or use the timer on your phone, and you want to tap count how many times your finger can tap in let's say 10 seconds, and you can trend that over time, and it's not only a measure of your overall kind of CNS efficiency, but if you look at it day to day, you can see it does correlate in a way to almost like heart rate variability, where you might be like, hey, I need to take it easy today. I'm shot today. My body's shot today. I'm not that efficient. And there's some simple techniques there. I've been using a device, or it's a piece of hardware along with software called Brain Gauge.
Okay.
And this device is meant to, it uses your somasensory system. So it looks like a little computer mouse, and what it's doing is it has two little notches on top that can vibrate, and so your index finger and your middle finger are the only thing touching it. And you go through a battery of tests that take about 10 minutes. But this has been like clinically validated in something like 30 to 40 different studies already with their technology. But you can go through a quick battery of tests, and it will identify parts of your brain that are kind of out of, maybe not optimal or out of whack. So they're using it to identify in athletes past, like if you've had concussions, or maybe something that's more acute, or if you just have some cognitive, you're just kind of exhausted, and you can do these tests like every day on this device. And so I started using it maybe like a month ago, and it's just an assessment tool, so it doesn't actually provide any treatment. It's just a way to kind of gauge what's going on. And my scores were already like pretty much like, I think they give you can dig into the details of the data, but they give you a score out of like a 0 to 100 at the end of the day. And I was at like I'd gotten up to like 98 out of 100. So there's very little room for improvement. But they asked me what I was doing, and I just kind of, or what I had just been doing. But my whole point was I had been doing this, over several years, trying to get my body into a place where it can maybe achieve that score. And so my interest in this device was more about finding things that negatively impact me. So I actually want to see if there's ever a time where my score dips, and maybe it was something I ate, or I got poor sleep the night before, or just I had a day of just a lot of thinking, and my mental capacity was just shot. So so I think there's, as much as we look at optimizing and getting things as great as possible, we want to know what affects us adversely.
So you're a brain hacker.
Well, we'll call it hacking, but
Yeah, optimizer, man. So
yeah.
listen, that's my greatest infatuation. I mean, the nervous system and the brain. After having dived into muscles for 20 years and now understanding, the physiology, I'm trying to understand how to optimize my mind and optimize, someone's mind. So let's dive into what you're doing there, man, because that's probably the deep abyss, right, that we're all trying to really figure out.
Sure, and especially as where people get into their professional lives and they're trying to, you have to always be on. You're always feeling like I always have to be on, and
Absolutely.
and you don't want things like brain fog and you're just fatigue setting in, which we all encounter. And so yeah, we can, so I've explored it in different ways. I'm not going to say I'm like an expert in every area, but I can say that I've done enough self-experimentation. I know kind of things that have worked or not worked for me, and your mileage may vary. That's just the biggest thing I've learned about kind of get into that world of brain hacking, or even nootropics and things like that. So for me, is there an area you wanted to talk about, or just?
Well, first thing, I mean, nootropics would be definitely an interesting conversation, and really any type of tech you're using to hack your brain, if there is anything. Nootropics is one of those. I try not to dive into nootropics because it's always, for me, I always tell people it's the last resort. It's always the last lever. But if that's kind of what you're doing mostly to optimize your brain, let's talk about that. Brain nutrients and nootropics.
Well, no, actually, I would actually, I agree with you in that there's a benefit to things like nootropics. And I mean, listen, if I have a cup of coffee in the morning, that's technically a nootropic. It's
yep.
It gives me a kind of little boost. But my personal take on nootropics is I've tried a lot of different ones and different substances or combinations, and a lot of them for me, I didn't get much kind of bang for the buck on them. Whereas just through diet, and my body likes healthy fats and things that will, that gets my mind going. But if you want to talk about more the hacking side, there are some cool couple of things that I've been using that have really kind of helped. And so the first would just be light therapy. So you can
Juve.
So Juve's like a device that's using certain wavelengths of light, and you can put that on your body. And now we're talking more about charging up your mitochondria, right? And there's some other systemic things happening, but really, when you talk about lighting up your brain and get it going, it's something like Juve. I've got some lights that pick up different wavelengths I've acquired over the years. There are also devices out there where you're basically shining near infrared light up your nose.
Yes.
Because
is that the human charger?
No, human charger goes through the ear, and that's a white blue light. That'll help with everything from like seasonal affective disorder to I use it as part of my jet lag protocol.
Mm-hmm.
So I can adjust to whatever time zone I'm going to go to several days before. But when you're talking about shining light up your nose, it's because you can get to the brainstem through that method, and so but also you can just by like something like a Juve light or a light that you're just in front of, you're still going to expose your body to it, and so your mitochondria, especially through your eyes, on your head, your heart, you're going to even through I like to shine it through my belly button, because your blood, you have an artery, your big main sort of thoroughfare of blood going right behind your belly button, and you can pretty much irradiate your entire bloodstream in 20 minutes that way.
What light are you using?
So I've got a few panels by this company called Gemba Red. So it's similar to something like Juve. The panels are just a little, like they're 12 by 12 panels. So I've got a few of them. And they're probably a little less powerful, but they use everyone has sort of a different combination of wavelengths they put together. I like it that it's a good general purpose. Like I can put it pretty close to my body, and it doesn't get super hot. And
that was my question: is how close are you getting if you're trying to radiate your belly button? Are you getting right up against it, or are you getting like a few inches away?
It really depends on the light. So I've got like this UFO style light that I got from China. That's like 100. I think it's 100 watts. And that can be that's like 6 to 9 inches away, and it's super power. It's like focusing a pretty tight beam on there. But I would never put that on my head. because it'll just it's so powerful. Whereas something that might be like a 45 watt light, like the Gemba Red, you can bring it closer. The only thing I would say is just make sure you use a light that doesn't have high EMF. Like they're often shielded. So I know there's been some debate about some of these lights and putting them right on the body or close to the body, because I can take like that Gemba Red light and put it right on my bare chest or on my stomach, and it doesn't get hot. I'm not uncomfortable by any means, but at the same time, you just want to be careful or aware of any of those EMF levels, especially if you're going to be doing it for a considerable amount of time.
Interesting.
And so like another tool, and so light is one way, you can really stimulate and energize yourself. I mean, there's never, getting in the sun is obviously going to be the best. For me, sunlight that's my number one sort of thing, getting outside and doing that. And if you can't, then we supplement it. We do it through different ways. And so
right.
Using light therapy is one way. I've been doing a lot with oxygen lately. So I have a system called LiveO2, which so you're probably familiar with EWOT, like exercise with oxygen training.
Yep.
So they've taken this idea of doing some moderate cardio exercise. Let's say riding a spin bike at 50% of max or 75%, just to get your heart rate going, get the blood flow going. And there's a reservoir that's full of concentrated oxygen, about 80%, because it's pulled from room air. And they've taken that concept of EWOT and made it into what's called adaptive contrast. So what that means is there's a switch that can go between that 80% air and bring you to more of like a hypoxic air. It's maybe 10%. So you're at, let's say 15,000 feet, and you do intervals. So let's say you warm up, and you do like a 15 to 30 second sprint on the bike with the hypoxic air. So then your brain's going, okay, I don't have oxygen. I'm going to pump my blood a little harder. And then you flip a switch, and we flood you with the 80%, and it just gets, systemically, it just gets deep into your tissues. The first few times you use it, you may have a detox reaction because it's going to clear away a lot of cellular waste. It can get really deep into capillaries that maybe haven't been oxygenated in a long time. And there's protocols around that you can adjust for that more target like just oxygenating the brain. And so when I was using that brain gauge device, and my scores were really high, and they were like, "What have you been doing?" And I'm assuming that some of these protocols and things that I had been using for a while maybe they've been contributing to it. But unfortunately, with the brain gauge, I didn't have like a before. My before scores were already very high.
So this is all with the LiveO2.
Yeah.
I didn't realize you could manipulate. I didn't realize that's what that did. You can manipulate like atmospheric pressure and levels of oxygen saturation.
So but you manipulate it just between two states. So you have an oxygen concentrator. It's pulling room air. It's going to kick that about 80% oxygen into a big reservoir. That's what you hook up with a mask to your face, and then you have a switch that will go between the 80% reservoir and the 10% reservoir. So that's the adaptive contrast piece.
You have one of those. You have one of those in your house. Like, you use that thing often?
Yeah. It's been in my home. It's been actually set up in my living room for about a year, and then, much to the chagrin of my girlfriend. But I just opened a small facility here in New York City, so now it's out of the house. It's in a place where I can offer it to the public. So we've got like doing that, and you've probably talked about things like ARX Fit and those other types of machines. So
you have an ARX in your place as well?
Yeah, I do. Yeah.
How do you like that?
It's. I mean, if I'm going to say I've got 15 minutes a week to train, that's going to probably be the thing. I think you always want to supplement with other things, but I think it's a great, I know just doing it twice a week, it's pretty cool. And I like the idea, being a data guy, I like the idea of being able to measure and trend, see what you're doing. But I still think there's no substitute for, you still want to do things that involve mobility and other types of exercises, play sports. And so I like it, but I'm not going to say I don't do anything else. But if you only have the ability to do a couple things in very limited time, it's a pretty cool technology.
So what other biohacking devices do you include at your facility?
I've been using a device called NanoV.
Yep,
it's
very familiar.
So NanoV, basically, if we talk about the environment and all the sort of oxidative damage and things that are happening to our bodies. What NanoV is basically doing is it's using very fine mist of like water vapor that they've imprinted a frequency basically into. So we're breathing it in. It's almost like you're breathing in light. Yep. I know it sounds really woo, but it comes down to things like structured water and the idea that you can imprint a signal into it, and we have to deliver it to the body. So they're using that as a method, and you basically breathe it in, and it turns out that the wavelength that they're using mimics the signal that we get with ROS. So when we get oxidative stress in our bodies, and so what you're getting is it's triggering the body to like repair cells, clear out dead ones, and then but at the same time you're not getting the secondary part of it, which is the damage. But your body thinks it's getting that that same signal, like as if you were getting a lot of oxidative stress. So we don't want to clear out. You need some oxidative stress. I mean, I would never use this right after training, like strength training. You actually want that signal for a little bit. But I use it, let's say in the morning for 30 minutes and often before bed. And for me, it's been from in terms of like energy and gains in strength and actually even body composition, which I never would have thought was actually a benefit of it. But it turns out, I guess, when you have better mitochondrial efficiency, you're going to have better fatty acid metabolism, and that was like my N of one kind of experiment looking at it. But I've had friends use it, and that were maybe not in the best of shape, and they would just use it a few times a week, and I was kind of really skeptical about like that would be a weird side benefit, but it seems to be happening.
Man, I totally agree with you. I've actually got one here, and the thing's amazing. I mean, your brain feels lit up. Your energy is definitely upgraded. It's like you just had a couple cups of coffee.
Yeah, I mean,
and that brain fog goes away. It's literally just like just turning up the mitochondria.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, people ask me kind of like, what are my go-to things? Like, what do you use every day? And for me, at least, that NanoV is one of those things that I'm just like, I'm going to find 30 minutes or an hour, at least 30 minutes a day. If I can use it again, while I'm unwinding in the evening, I'll use it again, because it actually has weird effects on me. Like in the morning, it energizes me, but then at night, it actually I'll fall asleep.
You got to find a way to hack, like getting in the sauna and getting the red light and the NanoV at the same time, right? We get like an extra long hose to take the NanoV into the infrared sauna. Yeah.
So, I mean, and now there's also like molecular hydrogen, which is another, major antioxidant. And so people are stacking, like using the NanoV while they're using like inhaling molecular hydrogen. And
do you have a machine, or are you just giving them just like tablets?
So no, I have the tablets. I've used the inhalers, but personally, I'm not stacking both right now together. I'll just use, I'll take molecular hydrogen tablets, once or twice a day, and then the NanoV. Like if I'm going to stack things with NanoV, I'll usually do like, because I have to lay there for 30 minutes, let's say. So if I'm not working or checking email in the morning or something like that, I'll stack it with other recovery protocols. So I'll do things like I use light and sound of brain entrainment. So kind of like in 20 minutes or 30 minutes, it brings you into the kind of this like theta or whatever sort of state you want, and you kind of come out of it really refreshed. And so I use a thing called Mind Spa, which is just like a pair of these weird looking LED glasses and you wear headphones and it plays a program. And you don't actually fall asleep or anything, but you kind of get knocked into this weird state, and then you come out of it very refreshed. So I'll stack something like that. I've stacked the NanoV with like compression therapy. Just like if I'm gonna lay there and do some compression therapy, I'll like the Normatec, those boots.
Yeah. These are the types of hacks I'm looking for your brain, man. Like these are things people want to know about, right? Like nootropics is one thing, and like I said, I always tell people to kind of hold off on the nootropic use, other than alpha GPC and lion's mane and maybe MCT. I don't think anything is useful all the time. They can be used as levers to help you if you're behind on something, but other than trying to optimize your brain with polyphenols and the basics, I'm not a big fan of most nootropics. But with things like this, with the NanoV, or with these lights and with these entrainment apps. Those are the types of things that people want to. I think people have a massive opportunity in front of them if they learn about them.
Yeah, and I would say on the supplement side, and this is something that isn't. I would call it more of a short term. If you need a short term like bump in terms of your brain activity, like I've done some experiments with pure ketone esters.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of talk about them in like the more in the performance athletic community. So someone's going to go do a leg of the Tour de France. They're going to take some esters. They're going to have like this crazy amount of energy, but it wears off after a few hours. So right. I did some experiments around cognition after taking esters, and it was pretty dramatic. Like I was really surprised that I had spent about 3 weeks establishing baselines on all these cognitive tests. So just so I wouldn't get any better at them, I knew I was going to level off. I knew that it was like, that's where I'm at. Mm-hmm. And I took these esters and then waited about an hour until like my ketones got into like this sort of sweet spot level that I was supposed to be in. Redid the tests, and like across the board, like all of my scores went up by as high as 30%.
Jeez.
And it was crazy. And then what was interesting was I then went and retested like over the next few days, not on the ketone esters, and my scores went back to my baseline.
Wow. So
it was like it was just a temporary bump, but it definitely did something. It definitely lit up my brain.
Good to know, man. I mean, a lot of the topics on the podcast lately have been. You just did a ketone week, and really optimizing the brain, optimizing longevity, optimizing performance. Obviously, my world is very much in the performance muscle building area, but optimizing the brain is everything. It's 100% of controlling your internal state. So if we can learn to optimize that, all of a sudden performance on every level gets better. So super interesting finding.
Yeah, I think there's a few levels of it, right? You want to first understand, like, okay, what is my current state of brain sort of health, right? And you can do that through QEEGs all the way to, again, things like brain gauge, those types of tools. And then that's kind of saying, well, this is my current situation. Let's figure out how to get that all resolved. And then you might say, like, okay, now how are we going to optimize and then improve? Get it to the best it can be. And I think a lot of people try to like go into biohacking is like, I want to do everything at once. And so sure. you got to figure out the steps to get there,
Yeah, absolutely, man. Bob, I appreciate you, man. What are you excited about right now?
What am I excited right now? So I'm getting really into, so we talk about light and frequencies and all that. I'm really big into frequencies because you can deliver them in many different ways, whether it's light, whether it's PEMF, whether it's through just electrical stimulation. So the effects that these things have on the body and the way you can pinpoint and target certain systems or even mimic substances is it sounds very woo and out there, but I'm experimenting with some stuff now that's like it's really cool. It's
dude, I get you, man. Like every cell in the body vibrates at a frequency. If you can affect it and manipulate it, and why wouldn't it make sense, right?
Yeah, exactly. And for me, like I'm okay saying something's woo, but especially if I'm able to measure it. I'm all about like if I can quantify something, then I know it's not necessarily a placebo effect.
Yeah, I completely agree with you, man. I'd love to hear more about that. Are you going to be updating us on your website?
Yeah, I'll be posting on quantifiedbob.com. There will be, I share a lot of kind of intermediate things on Instagram. So Quantified Bob on Instagram, you'll see like I'm often just taking photos of little things I'm doing. Like last weekend, I was making my own colloidal silver. And
how'd you do that?
You basically you have these silver rods that are nearly pure silver. And you get distilled water, and you need to run electrical current through them, but you need to have it. There's a formula to dial in the sort of amperage of the current that's going through. I'd never really done it before, but I was like, hey, I spend a lot of money on things like colloidal silver, and it's probably you make it for pennies. And I wanted something that was going to be at a certain parts per million, but using these calculators, I figured out what that should be, and then it took me about half a day for it to run, and then you shine a laser through it, because if you shine it through distilled water, there won't be any beam because there's no particles in it. But if you shine it through the colloidal silver space solution, you shine a laser through it, you'll see this nice clean beam, and which kind of shows that it definitely was being produced. And But yeah, it's just something that I just wanted to experiment with.
Are you doing colloidal silver for heavy metals?
No, I was doing colloidal silver. It's two things. One is the general wellness protocol, like something I'll swish it in the morning, deal with some maybe some dental things, and then
interesting.
I've taken it on and off, throughout the last couple of years. So I might go on for 2 weeks, consuming some, and then to knock out some underlying. If I've had some legacy, for example, things like a Epstein-Barr virus. Like if you had mono, like when you were a teenager, like you may still have, a lot of people still have Epstein-Barr in their systems, and it kind of can wreak havoc over time. So you're trying to figure out ways to maybe target some of these old infections or autoimmune conditions. But so for me, I'll just call it's a wellness protocol. Also, pro tip is you can throw a tablespoon or two in your laundry and it will kill your smelly gym clothes. The smell in it.
Man, so colloidal silver is one of those things that I've always been a little skeptical about, because it's the type of thing, kind of like you're saying right now, where somebody will come and go, yeah, you're sick, take colloidal silver. You got bacteria, take colloidal silver. You want to detox heavy metals, take colloidal silver. Like it's kind of does everything, and that's why I'm like, what does it really do? So I actually appreciate you talking about it, because if you're actually quantifying it and seeing a difference, you're one of those guys that I may actually take your opinion for it.
Well, I would say the very simple thing with colloidal silver is that it's known that silver is antibacterial. Like they're putting silver lining in the sports clothes now, right? Because it kills bacteria. So if we just look at it from that perspective, not making any drastic claims, I could say, okay, I'll put colloidal silver in the laundry, and I've had some gym clothes I just couldn't get the smell out of, and I threw some in, and guess what? It came out smelling great. So it's killing bacteria. So we know that happens. Now, in terms of, like you said, making claims about heavy metals and all that, I haven't used colloidal silver in terms of heavy metals. I do know, there's things like sprays, if someone feels like they have a sore throat or cold coming on, they've used it. But again, I'm just using it from the standpoint of seeing how I can build this wellness protocol. Because it can kill bacteria, though, if you take too much of it, you might be wreaking havoc on your gut, because you might be killing some of the good stuff. So that's something to be careful about.
Quantified Bob, I appreciate you, man. Great interview. I appreciate all this information. Please keep doing it, because it's always a factor of time. Like which thing do I want to test now? And actually, when I'm thinking about testing something new, I'll often go to your site to say hey, what's Bob checking out now, and what have you found, and does that correlate with what I've done, or does that correlate with what I want to do in the future? So, really, really grateful, and that environment thing. I think more people need to know about air, water, and EMFs. And I think that's a huge opportunity for you to keep exploring and how to optimize that. And I think if you do, people will keep finding you. So, Bob, thank you very much for all you do, man. I appreciate your time.
Yeah, thanks so much, Ben. It's been great being on.
And there you have it, ladies and gents. That was our conversation with Quantified Bob, digging into biohacking. And I think Bob gave us some pretty interesting insights into what he's doing and how you can really start to hack your life. He's one of the leaders in this whole biohacking space. And at your request, we've actually got some other people coming on to talk about biohacking as well. And each person seems to have their own little niche. They typically get really, really well known for one or two things. And what really got my attention about Bob's conversation was, or at least his website, he talks a lot about hacking his air and hacking his water. And that really started to bring my attention and my focus to the necessity and relevance of that, right? Like, how many times a day do you breathe? How many times a day do you drink water? That stuff is very, very important. That's, I think, even more important than food, because those things are affecting your biology immensely because of the number of times you're doing it every day. It's like breathing. If you don't think about the muscles that are controlling breathing, you're just mindlessly breathing, eventually you're going to lose your ability to control that breathing. You're going to lose your ability to have a deep, expansive breath of the rib cage, which is going to inhibit your mobility and your ability to move. So biohacking is a really interesting thing. And I hope you guys enjoyed the conversation. As always, if you enjoyed biohacking, or if you enjoyed Quantified Bob, head on over to his website and leave him a review and comment on some of his stuff. And he's got some really interesting stuff you want to look at, which I'll link to in the show notes. He's done some really cool research on a lot of things. And as always, enjoy the show. As always, I hope you enjoyed the show, and leave us a review and share it with at least one person that will help us continue this incredible movement of helping you all live your greatest life in a body that you love. Have a great day.
Join us on benpakulski.com to learn the cutting-edge techniques to take control of your body, your brain, and create your greatest life.